I grew up in Austin and have always loved it. And one of the things that's really great about Austin was growing up was that it was a not ostentatious city, unlike Dallas or Houston or other places in Texas and probably other places in the U.S. And when I started it, the other thing too is that Austin has always been an environmental city, and Barton Creek, which is adjacent to Waters Mark, was always, I swam there as a kid. And, we would have family picnics there, and I mean, it's an amazing place. And so, starting, I guess, in the 60s and 70s, there was always a big fight in Austin, Texas about protecting Barton Springs and protecting Barton Creek. So my thought was to build a subdivision that was environmentally sensitive, since it is absolutely adjacent to the creek, and then secondly, to build a subdivision where you could build a very nice house that wouldn't be ostentatious. And I guess at the time, Barton Creek, the whole of Barton Creek was under development, and if you were kind of an Austinite and you drove around Barton Creek and you saw these enormous houses, fountains out front, very gaudy, that was sort of bad taste, I guess, for an Austinite. So my thought was to try to build something that was more fitting of the scale of the land, the trees, and actually a place where you could have a really expensive house but not be ostentatious about it. So that was sort of the bottom line stuff for what we're trying to do. And at the time, I was trying to figure out an architectural style, and when you drive around Austin, there really wasn't much to look at that was tastefully done, I thought, and except for the Wildflower Center. And the architects that designed that, I actually went to San Antonio and met with them and hired them. At the same time, the country clubs of America that owned Barton Creek were very upset about the houses that were being built along the golf course. And so we actually went with some of the head pros from different golf courses on Country Clubs of America, and with Overland Partners from San Antonio. We actually went and toured some golf course developments around the U.S. And there was one in Scottsdale that was really, really well done. And so we sort of picked up some of their ideas. And they had, it was a very high-end golf course. I think, memberships were $250,000. The houses were absolutely beautiful. And so we sort of met with that developer, talked to them about how they did it, how they did architectural control, and sort of took some of those ideas as germs and came back and started here. And the way we actually developed this was, the way most subdivisions are developed, they're developed in a grid, and you lay out the streets, and then the lot lines are square, and then everybody just builds their house within that lot. And so you really start with the design of the streets first, and then you put the lots along the street. So in this case, what we did was a couple of architects from Overland Partners and I got out here and literally walked all over the land, and where we would find a site that'd be a great place for a house, we'd put a stake. And we did that across the whole development, and then we sent a surveying company back out to locate those stakes with a survey. And we actually picked out what we thought would be 66 great house sites, and we actually designed the streets to get to the houses instead of doing it the other way. And so sort of started with that concept. Then it's always amazed me is in some of the most interesting housing areas that I've seen had tiny streets. And the reason that's interesting is because the street impacts scale. And so you can have, if you have a very wide street, it actually serves as a barrier between neighbors. You know, like I live on Balcones Drive, and it's probably 33 feet wide, and I don't know my neighbor across the street near as well as I do the neighbor that lives next to me. So sort of the idea on the streets was that you keep them as small as you can, and that in effect then it's almost like having a sidewalk between you and your neighbor. It still functions as a road, but it prevents, it doesn't allow a street to become a social barrier. So we started out with those sort of concepts. You know, there's been some questions about drainage. I was actually on a group that wrote the ordinances that cover development over the aquifer, Barton Springs Aquifer. And we brought in water quality experts from all over the United States to talk about how you develop a subdivision without polluting the water. And there were two very simple concepts, and one is water pollution is directly, absolutely related to impervious cover. And impervious cover means like rooftops or streets, sidewalks, anything that water doesn't go through. And so not only do the smaller streets look better in terms of scale, but and you know, also, you know, don't become a barrier, they're also environmentally sound. And the reason impervious cover is directly related is that natural processes, meaning filtration through grass or through the soil, is an amazingly effective natural system to clean water. And the idea is that if you have less impervious cover, then each little blade of grass serves as the dam, slows down the water, it soaks in, you know, naturally existing microbes eat the pollution, actually. So that's another reason to have small streets. If you do curb and gutter, which is normally done in subdivisions, what you're really doing is concentrating the water, and then you have to put it in a pipe. Once it's that concentrated, and you'd have to discharge it straight into the creek. And it literally, once you do that, then none of the natural processes work, because the pollution, which is, you know, in solution in the water, gets in the street, it doesn't soak into the ground, it goes into an inlet, into a pipe, into the creek, and so it's directly polluting the creek. So the narrow streets and having no drainage pipe and no curb and gutter is really an environmental feature, and amazingly effective on water quality. In fact, the city has they actually measure the pollution in the creek below here several times a year, and the water quality coming off of Watersmark is as pure as the natural water that is in the creek. So it's amazingly effective. There are cities around that literally don't allow street lamps, and especially in Arizona, where, you know, sort of they have, in lots of cities now, actually adopting what's called night sky ordinances. And the theory is that when you walk outside at night, you'll be able to see stars. And so what we were trying to do here was you know, still have a sense of night, sky, stars. Um, and the way we did the lighting was, the theory was that you would set a light sort of at a horizontal viewpoint. So if you're walking down the street, you could see a light in a tree down the street, and you knew, the idea was that that sort of made you feel safe because you knew that light was there. So it was sort of, instead of having everything just absolutely lit like it was your living room, you would have sort of spots of light, be able to walk from spot to spot. And that idea was literally, you know, walking outside at night and seeing stars is a good thing. So that's the theory.
What about this front entrance and the gate and all? There's some commentary that, well, anyway, just generally.
In general. Again, it goes back to the idea that the whole subdivision was supposed to feel understated. And what was interesting is when we built the caretaker's cottage, it was the first thing that was built, and we actually built it while we were building the streets, and we would have people stop, come in, call about the caretaker's cottage. So the caretaker's cottage is really the entry feature, and the idea was to set the tone of the scale, colors, style, using the cottages as the entry feature. And you know, if you go, there are a lot of subdivisions that, I mean, I guess you've got Las Vegas, and you'd have huge water fountains and statues and stuff like that. And the idea was to get as far away from that as you could. And the other, you know, this is my own personal thing, but I think that scale is really important, and that scale ought to be inviting, that it shouldn't be impressive. So that was the theory, that it should be understated. We were meeting with the architects about the design guidelines. One of the architects made a really fascinating comment, and he said his favorite houses were houses that you could see, as you're driving down the street, you could see like an alcove, or see, you know, we ended up with a special place idea, but you could see sort of an area and you thought, man, that's really cool, and you can't quite see all of it, but it's enticing. And the fact that you can't see all of it is part of the enticement, that it's not just in your face out there, that there's something a little bit hidden, a little bit private, but you can see it. And so even the entry is sort of that way. When you drive up, you really can't see into the subdivision, can't really see into the cottage. And so there's sort of a little, you know, it's kind of corny to say, but it's a little mysterious. So it entices you. Part of the theory. Actually, Watersmark is much denser than it feels, and I mean, there's 66 units, and although the property is much larger, it's all crammed on about 35 acres or something like that. And the reason it still doesn't feel that dense is because there's lots of natural vegetation. And we went through great lengths when we were first locating the houses to try to locate them in the middle of trees so that you could build a house and be surrounded by trees. And we also, as we were building everything, we actually bought, I can't remember how many linear feet of the orange construction fence. And before we would let the contractor start, we put orange construction fence 3 feet outside of the curb along every street. And anytime they went outside of that, we actually fined them $2,500. And the theory was that at the end of the day, when they pulled out of here, it would look like the subdivision had been here for 100 years, that you didn't clear everything out and then had to grow something back. So, that was sort of our theory of keeping stuff. Also, is because it's so dense, the natural vegetation gives each home privacy, and that's especially true of cedar just because it's so dense. And I think if you trimmed out all the cedar, I think you would be stunned at how naked everything looks, and it would be a totally different character of the subdivision. And on the drought issue, cedar's been around for hundreds of years, and my guess is that it's probably the oak trees that are here probably survived worse droughts than we have now with cedar under them. So it's kind of hard to. I get the theory, but my guess is that practically, I don't think it's going to kill the oak tree. It may stunt the growth for that year, but I'd be really cautious about stripping out the vegetation, because I think you would be really sorry when you finished, just because of the way it looks. The theory, well, a couple of things. One is their skills are different, and sort of the architectural committee should really have members on it that know something about architecture, or at least care about architecture. And the board really is more a management budgetary function. So they're two different types of folks, and you sort of want different qualifications. Secondly, the purpose of having them be independent is what we wanted. It was the architectural committee to be bold and to be able to tell people no, or be able to tell them, yeah, you can do that, but you need to change this, this, and this. And so the theory was that that body would be absolutely independent and appointed, and be like the Supreme Court being an example. You want it to be independent. You don't want them to be up for election, and so you don't have neighborhood politics involved in architectural review. And I think that an elected board tends to be more political than an appointed architectural committee. So there's two basic reasons. One thing, so they would be independent. And they should be independent. And secondly, because their skills, a different skill set.
Now that we're pretty well built out, have you been through the neighborhood?
I have not. I haven't been in years.
Oh my gosh.
I'll go through it.
I can't wait to
Yeah.
One empty lot.
Is that right? Holy smokes.
Yeah.
Your friend Richard McConnell's lot.
Which one?
Richard McConnell.
He still owns that lot? Oh my God.
Yeah, he'll sell it if he gets to build on it. He could build it back.
Yeah, sorry, it's on the end of that. Well, we'll take a spin around here.
Yeah, I'd love to.
In fact, that question might be, but the question is, we're in the remodel approval process, and so I guess the real question is, as we face this, can you anticipate the kinds of challenges we might have, or?
Yeah. When we first started, I didn't list the lots with a residential broker. I actually sold them myself, and the intent of that was so that I can pick the buyers, pick the first 20 buyers, and hopefully those 20 would sort of set the stage. Everyone could see what was possible, and then follow that. And once you get kind of the resales and you get new people moving in, you don't get to pick them. And So I think what you sort of run the risk of, somebody moving here, they don't quite understand what Watersmark is about, or they drive in and they love it, but they don't understand it, and then they want to, build a ostentatious house, a house that's too large, a house that's out of scale. They don't have a relationship with their neighbor, so they try to expand in a way that the neighbor may not like. So I think you've got lots of potential conflicts in that. And actually, remodels kind of worry me more than the originals, because the original you kind of control the whole, and remodels can get out of hand really quick. And one of the things that was important was the house size limitations in here, and we spent a lot of time coming up with those numbers. And so and the goal was to keep the scale of the houses next to each other, and scale in comparison to the trees and the roads and everything correct. And so I think that the architectural committee needs to be incredibly diligent in watching the size of the house. I guess there must have been a controversy here over a house sometime back, recently, I guess, but I got a couple of emails from folks, and sort of one of the issues was that the market has changed, therefore we ought to allow different houses. And I think that's a terrible idea. And I'm a developer and I appreciate markets, I promise. But in here, in Watersmark, everyone is contractually limited to market. And I'll give you an example how that works. In Houston, I'm working on a project. We're building an apartment project on one site, and we're selling off the site next to us. And we don't want a competitor, so we're saying we're restricting that adjacent tract to no apartments. And so that's a contractual agreement that limits the market. And in Watersmark, and so if that guy came in a year later and said, sorry, I want to build apartments, you'd say, no, we have an agreement. We have a contract. And the restrictions in Watersmark are a contract between everybody that lives here and between every new buyer that buys a lot. And if they come in and they say, oh, the market's changed, the response ought to be, that may be, but we have a contractual agreement. And there's nothing wrong with that. It happens every day in real estate. Every single subdivision has deed restrictions. And to say that the market sort of ought to rule is an absolute misunderstanding of the nature of real estate, of deed restrictions and the contract that is. So I think allowing architectural design that doesn't meet the guidelines with the justification that market has changed is just a terrible reason. Everyone should fight that tooth and nail. On parking, the idea was always to try to limit it, one. And then secondly, we weren't quite sure where to put it because we didn't exactly know where the best locations would be because of house design. So our theory was you'd sort of let the houses be built, and then you would go back in and in some areas put in parking, and that could be literally just a pull-off spot on the road. It could be an area that's already open, no trees, no vegetation, so you could put, railroad ties and some wood chips down and create parking. But the idea always was at some point you would need more parking, but you should do it later when it's sort of built out and you knew what the houses were going to be like, where they were going to be, and you sort of fit it in after the fact. So I think adding some parking would be very simple to do, and there's nothing wrong with it. So I just think you should do it. I think now's a perfect time to start looking at where you could put some in without hurting anybody's house, without, so that was always the theory. Oh, as I was driving out here, I was thinking that I think I've developed roughly 20,000 lots over 35 years. And what's amazing is that each subdivision has a different type of buyer, and it's a different type of person. And what the people that live in Watersmark, I was trying to figure out how to describe them. They're different than the people that live in the big houses in Barton Creek. And this is going to sound ugly maybe, but it's true. I think they're more open-minded, better educated, more worldly, more friendly. It's a different person. And going back to the remodeling, when we started Watersmark, there were only 66 lots, and everybody kept saying, "Man, you're crazy because no one's ever done this, and you've got some stuff in here that people aren't going to like, and you're going to have a hard time selling them." And my response was, "Yeah, but I only need 66. And out of 1 million people in Austin, there'll be 66 people that will want this." And so I think, architecturally, you need to think about sort of that fact that there's only 66 of them. And so when somebody comes in and says, "Hey, I want to do this," or "I'm not going to buy the house," send them on down the road. They probably don't belong in Watersmark. And honestly, they're probably a different type of person than you would want as a neighbor anyway. There's something to, it's a different type of person, and they're great people. Okay.
It's not. They wanted to build.
It's the one where they had the reflecting pool in there somewhere?
They do. They have a.
I don't remember this one.
Schnitzer. Instead of wood. Yeah.
Houses. It was pretty fun.
Wow.
A lot of all pretty cool people.